recent changes in real estate policies, both in New York and California. We will be learning about how New York is changing the way real estate agents can post listings, as well as how propositions 19, 15, 21 will affect the California market. Very valuable information for realtors as well as home buyers and sellers. Pete Zizi, William Dickey, thank you so much for joining today. Our guest, Pete, is a full-time realtor who runs a team with RE/MAX Plus in Rochester, New York. Pete is an entrepreneur at heart and had numerous awards in real estate. We've met a number of years ago at Inman. So Pete, thank you so much for joining us today. Could you please share what's your view on the election results, and then how will the market be affected?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Natalia. I appreciate it. Always a pleasure to be on. Yeah, the election results or lack thereof so far are a little disconcerting. I think any uncertainty is bad for the market, just like it is for any other business, including the stock market. All I can say is hopefully it's sorted out quickly. And it's pretty surprising too. In New York, New York's known to be a very democratic state. Democrat Party. But if you look at the election results map that just got posted today, 90% of the state's red, except for the big population centers of Kings County, New York City, Queens. I think Monroe County, where Rochester is, went slightly blue. But even Buffalo, which is historically blue, seems like it's gone red as well. So, obviously the big population centers carry the rest of the state. And Biden won here, but it's interesting to see how that flows. Everybody looks at the macro view of the state, but really it's more interesting when you drill down into the county view.
So what's the situation in your county specifically?
So I live in Ontario County, but most of my work is in Monroe County. And Biden, I think, won by 50,000 votes maybe in Monroe County, where Rochester is, but Ontario County went Trump.
Mm-hmm. Is this a surprise to you?
No, it's pretty much the norm. I got to double check because I haven't looked at it in a few hours, but Buffalo historically is always blue as well. There's the Buffalo Billion a couple of years ago, and our governor, who's a Democrat, infused a ton of money into Buffalo. And there's a fair share of scandalous news stories and whatnot that came out of there. But everybody thought that was going to be blue as well. And I'm pretty sure it went red. I'll double check right now. So.
And how about conversations with your customers and agents? Anything unusual you're seeing these days?
I mean, unusual is such a loose term these days. I mean, after COVID, there's like nothing off the table, right? It's just a lot of uncertainty. A lot of people are afraid to make a move. And we've seen it all year long, but for different reasons. We've had a very low inventory situation in Rochester and really most of New York for a while. And a lot of that prior to COVID was the uncertainty of finding a new house to either move up or move down into. You get certain price points in the middle that get squeezed from buyers that are coming down from the high end and coming up from the first time home buyer market. And without enough inventory, neither of those parties are confident that they find what they want to, that they'll find what they're looking for. So then a lot of people choose not to do anything. And then COVID hit, and a lot of people were very unsure about what they should do there because of the health situation, because of their jobs and the layoffs and whatnot. We switched a lot of what we were doing online to 3D models, and I've always done my own photography, so I was still legally able to get in there and do that. And we still closed a few million during COVID, mostly 100% virtual, because in New York, there was a long time where nobody was able to enter a house. But if things were in process, then they were still allowed to close, unlike Pennsylvania, where literally everything got shut down. So if you were under contract, you couldn't close. In New York, that didn't happen. But then we had varying levels of regulation where, at first nobody was allowed in the house. Then at least we were able to go take pictures, but we couldn't meet people there. So then we had to switch, I switched up a different type of lockbox I've switched up to different ways of presenting properties. We've switched ways of writing descriptions to be more honest in the description. And just by constantly weekly changing our operations, we were able to still move people, in and out of houses, right? So now that COVID is still here, but everything has been more on the track of opening, um, you get, the school year starting. And historically, that's a very slow time of year because everyone has to get their kids back into school. Everything usually, but the first time home market usually slows down. This year, that slowed drastically because a lot of people were trying to figure out what school actually meant now and how to homeschool their kids and still work. Um, Now we're kind of on the other side of that. I just wrote an offer this weekend. We were one of 16 offers on this house that was a perfect first-time homebuyer house.
Wow.
And other houses in slightly higher price ranges only got maybe 2 or 3 offers. So it's definitely price point, neighborhood, zip code specific, in relation to demand, right? And now the election. So we've had different varying levels of uncertainty for multiple different reasons all year. And but the one thing I can say is that people still need a place to live, and it's still a very hot market, and it's still moving very well. So I think with certainty in real estate comes more certainty and comfort in everything else.
Yeah. So before we're hearing that a lot of regulations were introduced because of the COVID-19. Also, we will cover this new MLS policy shortly, but I want to elaborate a little bit on California propositions that currently are being voted for that relates to housing. So I will share my screen and Willie will give an overview of 3 propositions that are now being voted for in California, which will affect the real estate market drastically. We believe so. And I think it's important for homeowners, sellers, as well as realtors to understand those propositions. We will be covering this topic in more details next week on our next webinar. But today we will cover at least a little bit of that. So Willie, could you please share a little bit in details?
Sure. So 3 propositions related to real estate on the ballot in California. So the first one, Proposition 19, this would allow homeowners 55 and older, the severely disabled, or victims of a wildfire to bring their favorable property tax with them whenever they move statewide for up to 3 moves. So this is obviously something very applicable to California. They've been devastated recently in the last couple of years with wildfire, and a lot of times, even if somebody's home isn't affected in terms of physical damage, the value can plummet if the neighborhood is devastated or something, and people are stuck there. So this is a nice way to allow people to relocate and take advantage of the tax rate when they go into a new home. Pete, I know you practice in New York, but you're a real estate guy. So were you aware of any of these propositions in California? And if so, specifically Prop 19, you have an opinion?
No, it's the first I've really seen about that, and it makes a lot of sense. I was wondering what the government was going to do to help the wildfire victims, because it's crazy what's going on out there. So this is interesting.
And I think it's very timely proposition, especially for highly gentrified areas such as Silicon Valley, where a number of elder homeowners actually cannot afford to move to a new place, to a new house, just because then their tax will be at a very much higher rate. So it's definitely a favorable situation proposition that would allow more liquidity in the market to happen, especially in the highly gentrified areas such as Silicon Valley. So obviously realtors are very happy that for now Proposition 19 seems to be most likely to pass, but we're still waiting for the final results. And it's very important for realtors and homeowners to understand the implication of this proposition.
Now, the next proposition is Proposition 15, which is an interesting one. So this would tax properties based on current market value rather than the purchase price, and increase property taxes on commercial properties for funding to local governments and schools. So this is certainly an interesting one. You know, you have situations where somebody may have purchased an asset 50 years ago and they're still paying an incredibly low tax rate because it's based on the value from 50 years ago as opposed to today. So in my opinion, I think this is a good thing. If an asset's increased in value, that generally means that it has the cash flow to support, you know, the current expenses and other things associated with it. So this one's pretty interesting. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of opposition to it from landlords, but
and we're seeing that the vote for now it's going negative, but we'll see what's going on. Many opponents actually believe that Proposition 15 is the first step towards higher homeowner property taxes, which many claim that that's not the case, and that no changes to residential taxes are planned to be made. But obviously there is some panic on that regards.
And then Proposition 21 allows local governments to establish rent control on residential properties over 15 years old. So this one, at first glance, was also rejected, but California is going through an affordable housing crisis. You've seen a lot of these hotspots, Silicon Valley. Natalia, I know you're in Palo Alto, so you're right in the thick of this. And these large tech companies have come in, and the prices have skyrocketed. So for the the workers there, not necessarily the highly paid, but for the everyday workers, janitors, chefs, that kind of thing, then they can't afford housing, and they either have unsustainable commutes or they're living in really kind of just small living situations. So this is an interesting one. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of lobbying behind it with some of the larger companies and employees that work there. But Natalia, I'm sure you have an opinion on this since you're sort of right in the thick of it.
Yeah, well, for now, this proposal is rejected. And obviously the rent control protects the interest of low-income communities to protect them from higher rents. And at the same time, investors and landowners, they want to have the free market to invest in real estate, to build real estate and rent it out. So this proposition has been rejected, and I'm a proponent of the market decision, whether there is a demand or the lack of demand for rental, and thus the rental price should be determined by demand and supply. And we are seeing this happening now in San Francisco, where the landlords that are willing to offer a lower price are just finding the ways to make it in a different way. So they just offer 1 or 2 months for free. So they still practically are doing the pricing for rentals as the market demands to be, but just in a different way because they tied from the regulatory perspective. Pete, how is the situation with the rental control in your area?
So I'm upstate New York, and New York City is far, far different in pretty much every aspect of real estate. But one thing that did pass the state Senate and signed by the governor a few years ago was rent propositions that made all of the pro tenant laws of New York even very more pro-tenant, increasing things like eviction. After you get an eviction, usually they had a 3-day notice that was posted before they had to be out. Now that's been extended to 2 weeks. You cannot collect more than 1 month's deposit at the time of renting, including applications fees or pet deposits. So those are completely out the window. So you get security in first months, no last months, anything like that. And for Rochester up here, it definitely affected a lot of us. I'm a landlord as well, with the eviction side of it, because if somebody damages the apartment, if they're not paying, it's much, much harder to evict them, even going through all the proper channels, which we need to do. You can start a proceeding and make it go all the way to court, and up until the last day before you get the eviction approved, they can catch up the rent, and then everything goes away and you have to start all over again. So there's a lot of rent laws that have changed, but we don't have rent control in Rochester. I know that there's been talks of it that we're aware of through NYSAR, the New York State Association of Realtors. Their legal update lets us know of all the different bills that are in process, but we haven't seen that.
Great, thank you. And now we'll discuss this new rule in New York, these new changes. Pete, can you comment a little bit? What are the differences? What is your reaction on this change that went into effect on November 2nd?
So again, I think that's going to affect New York City way more than upstate New York, because
can you share what's that about?
Yeah, so back in 2018, I believe, and then refined again in 2019, anytime you're paying for an advertisement on a third-party website that has your name on it next to another broker's listing, it had to have been acknowledged that that's an advertisement, and then that's not your listing.
And this is how Zillow operates, right?
Exactly.
Zillow gets all the MLS listings, and then they put another agent name next to the listing, and then they sell it as an ad, and agents can bid to appear next to this listing. And this is how Zillow made billions of dollars in revenue. So now New York decided to fight this, so yes, please proceed.
Yeah, they've been the regulations changed a few years ago. So in upstate New York, this is a common thing where if we are syndicating to my own personal website through an IDX feed, right underneath the listing details, it'll say who the listing broker is and what brokerage they're with. So that's just standard. We have to get advance permission from another broker to even share their listing on our Facebook page. If I think a house is really nice and I want to share it with my friends, I have to first get permission from that broker and acknowledge that it's not my listing on Facebook, right?
Do you think it's a bad thing that actually you cannot just get easy exposure to your listing, or it's a positive thing to you as an agent to allow to own this data?
So I think it's positive as a listing agent that all exposure is good exposure, but at the end of the day, you want those leads coming back to you and your brokerage for your listing. And with Zillow, when you're buying ad space on a zip code, you're showing up in order of review. Before, you had to scroll all the way to the bottom of the listing to see where the listing agent's information was. And I think that was decided to be misleading to the general public. So now if you look at a Zillow listing, it's first. The first person that you see is the listing agent, and it's front and center. And I think that's great. The Facebook thing I think is valuable. I would have no problem giving permission to anybody to share our listings because we want people to see them.
Do you have this request?
Oh, definitely. And it's usually agents that are being very cool, like, hey, I like this listing, can I share it? And we're like, definitely, go right ahead. But there was a lot of shady business going on before too, where people would send that out, making it look like it was their listing just to get leads off of it. So again, things are way different in Rochester than they are downstate. I think this is going to affect downstate New York City a lot more, especially with the rental market. I remember a couple of years ago, there was a big problem with StreetEasy in the Premier Agent program. And I think it was pretty much basically the same thing where agents were paying to advertise other people's listings, but it looked like it was their own listing and not the broker who listed it. So I think this is just a continuation of rules that they already passed. but making them stronger and making more specific verbiage that this is an advertisement and that the advertised broker is not saying that this is their listing or that they're part of that transaction. So I'm curious how it'll affect us up here, but I imagine it's going to affect downstate a little bit more.
And do you think that other states and the NAR, the National Association of Realtors, will follow?
So I think, I mean, just speaking in Rochester, when we put a listing in the MLS, and we have to check a box that says we're okay with it going on the internet via an IDX feed. So we're giving an implied consent to send our listings out on the internet so that they show up on all these different websites. Anywhere that I've ever looked, I usually see the listing agent's name somewhere on that listing. I think New York is making that more prominent, and I could see some other states definitely following that, especially California. Usually whatever happens in California and New York, they kind of go in stride with each other. But I'd be curious to see how that goes. And
what do you think about the recent Zillow changes, hiring agents? We're seeing more and more negative attitude to this new business pivot. And for example, there was an article and a panel discussion between Courtney Poulos about allowing these listings to go to Zillow to opt out the internet education. It feels like some of the agents really want to unite and say, okay, let's not let our listings to go on IDX syndication on the internet. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I remember back in the day when Zillow first started, I liked Zillow a lot. I've been to Zillow Premier Agent meetings in Vegas and met Spencer and hung out with and met their whole management crew back then. And I was a paying Premier Agent for, I think, 6 years. And back then, they were always very vocal about we are not going to become a brokerage. What they wanted to do was create a marketplace, and they did that very well, where they had inventory and then they had consumers and they put them together and they created a marketplace. And of course we wanted to be there. And back then some brokers stopped syndicating to Zillow, which we were able to use as a positive for us because we did syndicate, meaning that we would put your listing in front of more people. And I think at the end of the day, we have to do what's going to be best for our clients, which is exposure and getting it in front of other buyers who might want to purchase the home, right? So I'm definitely not in the camp of people should band against Zillow and stop IDX and all that stuff. I think that's just shooting yourself in the foot and not representing your clients the best way. I wish Zillow would have stayed with that more, we're partners with realtors as opposed to now being, perceived competition. We don't have firsthand
knowledge
of it here because their iBuyer program is not in New York. And their Zillow Homes program isn't in New York either. I think they're just starting it in like 3 cities. So I'm not going to worry about it until I have to. And even if the iBuyer program was here, I've learned enough from my friends around the country of how to, make a presentation to counter that, and it's up to the consumer to go whichever way they want to go. I'm not shocked by their move. We've heard for years that Zillow has been joining getting broker licenses and joining MLS boards so that they don't have to rely on brokers syndicating to them. They can get the information firsthand, which is great for them. It's just going to be, it'll be a interesting time in the business to see how everything flows, but all we can do is keep working for our clients and making sure that we keep their best interests in mind. And, I think syndication is still a good thing.
Now, Pete, you mentioned that you're a landlord as well, and with everything going on during COVID, obviously there's been a lot of concessions made for tenants. Now, everybody loves to have this view that all landlords are, evil and trying to take advantage, which there certainly are those out there. But, there's a lot of small landlords, mom and pop, they've been doing it for a long time. And I know my landlord actually in New York City is in that situation. And there really hasn't been much done to help them. So I guess there's a couple questions from that. A, what do you think should be done to provide some relief to the landlords who are going to be suffering the most?
Yeah, so the taxes still need to be paid. The insurance still needs to be paid. Luckily, during COVID, banks were pretty good about doing forbearances, where they wouldn't waive the money. It's still due, but it's now accumulated and put on the end of the loan. So, I applied for that program with my two rental properties. And when that got approved, I was very transparent with my tenants and said, listen, um, I'm able to postpone these payments for 90 days and my holding costs went down by X. So I'm going to lower your rent equivalent so that my break even is still there. Like I'm still be able to pay the taxes and pay the insurance, but I was able to cut their rent in half for those 90 days. And because I was proactive about it and brought that to the tenants, I knew that it was something that they were going to be worried about. One tenant that I have is a bartender. Two other ones work in the restaurants, so they were effectively out of income. And there was such a waiting list to get into the unemployment benefits program that they didn't even see money for almost 60 or 75 days. So I proactively wanted to look out for them and make sure that I can still pay my fixed costs. So I applied for forbearance, passed on the savings to the tenants. They were able to pay that, and they've appreciated the fact that I was, forthcoming in that. Right, I didn't try to make money on them. Well, at a time when everybody's just trying to get by. Um, what I don't really like is what Governor Cuomo and the state passed, which is the eviction moratorium, which the wording is so vague that it's not just anybody who wants to play the game can play the game and stop paying rent, and you couldn't do anything about it. And there's nothing that they have on the books to alleviate the pain on the landlords. The landlords still have to pay their mortgage and pay the taxes and pay the insurance, but some tenants are playing that game and they're legally allowed to because of the rules that New York State passed. That just ended, and now there's this whole wave of evictions, and it's just going to get ugly. Luckily, I've been able to avoid all of that by just being upfront and honest and just frankly cool with my tenants and said, look, we're all in this together. Let's figure it out and move forward. So I definitely think that the new rules that New York State passed are hurting landlords more than COVID did.
And what could we see? I mean, I know in New York City, I think it was something like 90% of restaurants and I believe retail missed rent for the last couple months. What could be what could it look like, whether it's New York City or up near you, if we don't give some sort of relief to struggling landlords? And you seem to be managing this situation well, but I'm sure most landlords are not.
No,
Not.
it's not. I mean, if you couple everything that's going on along with the new rental laws that passed about not collecting more than 1 month up front, ask the agents in the Hamptons how they're doing with seasonal rentals. They're getting hammered. Like the landlords have people living in these multi-million-dollar houses for free, and they usually would have paid up front for the whole season, and now I hear that that's not the case. So I mean, the banks have to be able to work with the landlords on postponing payments or postponing eviction or not eviction, list pendants and foreclosure filings. A lot of these landlords, they're not rich, stinking rich, crazy landlords that have all this money that they can just burn. A lot of them, this is their retirement account. This is their family funding account that they've worked towards paying this house off so they can then live off of the rental income, and they've worked on maintaining the properties. With no rental income or with having somebody effectively squatting in their house, damaging the property, they don't have the money to pay the mortgage, the taxes, the insurance, or the maintenance to repair it. Um, if something isn't done, I worry about a big wave of foreclosed rental properties, people losing their equity that they've worked on for years to build because of poorly thought out rules and professional tenants.
I know that I have some friends on the lending side of the business, and it's been interesting because as opposed to '08 where you had bad actors, this is sort of a situation where there were no bad actors, so there's much more of a willingness for lenders to work with landlords. At what point do you think we start seeing foreclosures? As you said, they've been accommodative thus far, but if this goes on for another year, what do you see happening?
So the banks have been amazing. They were offering to extend the forbearance that I got, and I didn't need it anymore, so I had to just take me out of the program. But they were more than willing to extend it. So once those extensions stop, if the state doesn't change their laws, I think it could get ugly second quarter of 2021. But I'm hoping that that doesn't, because you're right. A lot of the people who can't pay rent are justified in the fact that they can't work, they got sick, their restaurant shut down. Those are all very valid reasons that we need to work together to help everybody get through this. What you do have is a good handful of bad actors that are tenants that are just taking advantage of that situation, that are just choosing not to pay their rent. And there's really, I mean, there should be some sort of proof or some sort of way that the landlord can verify that the tenants truly were affected by COVID and can't pay the rent, versus they're just going to try to work the system and not pay it. I haven't had that firsthand happen to me, but I've got plenty of landlords around Rochester, which is a pretty small city compared to New York, that are dealing with just that. They have effectively squatters. They've lost 60% of their income. This one guy did, and he literally hasn't been able to do anything thanks to the new rules that the state passed.
Interesting for sure, and that it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out, and if the government steps in to provide any sort of relief to landlords like they've done to tenants.
And I totally agree with you, Pete, that there should be some level of validation. Of course, it's a burden for the government to actually introduce these new policies and some people to actually check those validation. But in order to have some justice in this situation with bad and good actors, probably it makes sense so that we don't see the fall of so many mortgages next year.
Yep. And when I was at NYSAR meetings before COVID hit last fall, we were already a few months down the road with all the new eviction laws that the state passed. And a few landlords that I talked to, the consensus was that the lawmakers were probably coming from a place of trying to help tenants, right? They wanted to help the tenants, make sure their rent's not unjustly getting raised or getting kicked out for no reason, that kind of thing. But because they made it so hard on the landlords, a lot of these bigger landlords were less likely to take a chance on somebody who might have shaky credit or might not have a stable job, but they thought was a nice person. They're like, you know what, let's just try it out and see if it works, and if it doesn't work, then I can, work it out with you and then rent it to somebody else. And, lots of landlords I know are very cool and helpful and want to help people out. But because now, say you do take a chance on somebody and they really don't work out, you're looking at 5 or 6 months before you go through the whole process before that person actually gets out and you can start getting a paying tenant back in your unit. People are very afraid. So it's almost like the guidelines to rent the apartments, got raised. A lot of landlords want really, really good credit, really stable income, right? Obviously, they can't discriminate on certain features, but they're a lot less likely to take somebody with a lower credit score as opposed to a higher credit score, I hear. And that's not helping anybody, because that's just limiting housing options for the people that need it the most. And it doesn't make any sense.
Totally. Great. So, Pete, thank you so much for your insights today. We will be wrapping up. For the final words, I'd like you to share a few tips to your colleagues, to the market participants, homeowners, landlords, realtors, on how to what to do now in these times of uncertainty. And then afterwards, everyone who wants to stay online after this panel, we will be having 5 minutes of updates on our product. We're releasing few new features we'd like to share with our audience. And also, today we have released a use case study on Pete, Zizi, Remax Plus team, how they've been using property transaction management system as well as offer management. So you can check on our website, property.com, and read more about Pete. He's definitely a great example of a leader entrepreneur, not only real estate entrepreneur, but he also has an experience in technology entrepreneurship, building tech tools. So it's definitely a person and a team to look after. So Pete, what are your main tips for these times?
So yeah, I think for landlords, for people, for listing agents, 3D modeling of homes before you list it is imperative. People really need to get in and get a good view of what they're looking at before they're willing to leave their house and come into the property. Just like with listings, sellers want to limit the number of people who come in to very vetted out qualified buyers, and 3D modeling is a great way to stay on top of that. But from a business point of view, what we've been preaching with our team is just getting all expenses really drilled down to, where every penny is going, being really on top of your business plan, and just solidifying the fact that if anything does happen again with another shutdown, that you're good for at least 3 to 4 months of business expenses, and you really get ahead of that now. So we've had a great year ever since, COVID kind of let up a little bit. It was like the spring market and the summer market all hit at the same time, and every realtor that I know is just so busy right now. So it'd be a great time to put some money away and get prepared for winter when it's normally a little bit slow. And if worst case scenario happens again, then we're ready for it this time.
Great tips. Thank you, Pete. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pete.
Thank you, Will.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Pete.
Bye.
Bye-bye, William.
Bye.
We will have Valley now to share some updates. Goodbye to our community on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. If you want to see the updates on the product, sign up to our webinars, weekly Wednesday webinars on prophet.com, the very button, so that you can have access to product updates. So once we won't be live and Valley is ready to share her screen, we will start a small update on the new feature that we have released, which is audit documents.
Yes, hello. So I'm going to share my screen in a minute once we stop